Welcome, dear listeners, to another enchanting journey through the realm of ancient myths and legends. I'm delighted to have you join me tonight as we delve into one of Greek mythology's most celebrated tales. Before we begin our story, if you're enjoying these mythological adventures, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. I'd also love to know which corner of the world you're listening from, whether you're tucked in bed in Tokyo, relaxing in Rio, or winding down in Warsaw. Please share your city and country in the comments below. Tonight, we travel back to ancient Greece, a land where gods walked among mortals and heroes embarked on impossible quests. Our story follows one such hero, Theseus, the legendary conqueror of the Labyrinth and slayer of the dreaded Minotaur. In a world where courage was the currency of greatness, few earned as much respect as this remarkable prince of Athens. The tale of Theseus is one of determination, cleverness, and incredible bravery. It's also a story that reminds us of the complexities of heroism, for even the greatest heroes carry flaws alongside their virtues. As we journey together through this ancient tale, we'll witness triumphs and tragedies, love and betrayal, and the making of a king who would forever change the destiny of Athens. So settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to transport you to the sun-drenched shores of ancient Greece. Let the gentle waves of the Aegean Sea wash away your daily concerns as we begin our tale of Theseus, the Labyrinth conqueror, a hero whose legacy has endured for thousands of years, continuing to captivate our hearts and minds, even in modern times. The gods of Olympus are watching, the monsters are waiting in the shadows, and our hero's journey is about to unfold. Are you ready to begin? Then let us turn now to where all great stories start, the very beginning, with the birth of a prince destined for greatness. In the ancient city of Troezen, nestled along the northeastern shores of the Peloponnese, our story begins with a secret union. King Aegeus of Athens, desperate for an heir after two failed marriages, sought counsel from the Oracle of Delphi. His journey home led him to Troezen, where King Theseus, understanding the oracle's cryptic warning, arranged for Aegeus to meet his daughter Aethra. That night, under the blanket of stars, Aegeus and Aethra conceived a child, one who would later be known throughout Greece as Theseus. Before departing for Athens, Aegeus placed his sword and sandals beneath a massive boulder and told Aethra, "When our son grows strong enough to lift this stone, give him these tokens and send him to me in Athens." With these words, Aegeus returned to his kingdom, unaware that the goddess Athena had visited Aethra that same night, blessing the unborn child with divine favor. Months later, Aethra gave birth to a strong, healthy boy whom she named Theseus. The young prince grew up believing that Theseus was his grandfather and that Poseidon, god of the sea, was his divine father, for Aethra had kept Aegeus's identity a secret. Under the watchful eyes of his mother and grandfather, Theseus developed into an extraordinary youth, displaying remarkable strength, intelligence, and courage that set him apart from his peers. His education was extensive, encompassing not only the arts of combat but also music, philosophy, and governance. As the years passed, Theseus's reputation for bravery spread throughout Troezen. Local legends tell of how he confronted wild boars that threatened farmers' fields and stood against bandits who preyed upon travelers. With each passing season, his shoulders broadened, his arms strengthened, and his resolve hardened. By his 16th birthday, Theseus had grown into a powerful young man whose presence commanded respect wherever he went. On the day Aethra deemed him ready, she led her son to the massive boulder that had waited patiently for this moment. "My son," she said, her eyes glistening with both pride and concern, "beneath this stone lies your destiny and the truth of your lineage." Without hesitation, Theseus planted his feet firmly on the ground, bent his knees, and wrapped his strong hands around the edges of the immense rock. With a mighty heave that seemed to draw strength from the very earth itself, he lifted the boulder and pushed it aside. There, in a small hollow beneath where the stone had rested for nearly 2 decades, lay a magnificent sword with a hilt of gold and ivory, alongside a pair of well-crafted leather sandals. As Theseus reached for these treasures, Aethra revealed the truth. "Your father is Aegeus, king of Athens. These are his tokens, left for you to claim when you were strong enough to earn them." The revelation struck Theseus like a thunderbolt from Zeus himself. He was not merely the grandson of a king, but the heir to one of Greece's most powerful cities. That night, as Theseus turned the sword over in his hands, watching how it caught the firelight, he made his decision. He would journey to Athens to claim his birthright and meet the father he had never known, despite his mother's pleas to travel by sea, the safer route. Theseus declared he would go by land, confronting the notorious bandits who terrorized the coastal road. "If I am to present myself as the son of a king," he announced, "I must arrive having proven my worth." As dawn broke the following morning, Theseus bid farewell to his mother and grandfather. With his father's sword strapped to his side and the sandals upon his feet, he set his face toward Athens and stepped forth on a journey that would transform him from an unknown prince to a legend whose name would echo through the centuries. Little did he know that the road ahead would test not only his strength, but also his character, wisdom, and humanity. The road from Troezen to Athens stretched like a serpent across the rugged Grecian landscape, infamous for the dangers that lurked along its path. 6 notorious bandits, each with their own twisted method of torment, had turned this route into a gauntlet of terror that few travelers survived. Yet Theseus, with youthful confidence and divine blood coursing through his veins, saw these obstacles not as reasons to turn back, but as opportunities to prove himself worthy of his heritage. The first challenge came in the form of Periphetes, known as the club bearer. This hulking brute had terrorized travelers for years, crushing skulls with his massive bronze club. When Periphetes leapt from behind a rocky outcropping, demanding Theseus surrender his possessions, the young hero stood his ground. "I surrender nothing," Theseus declared, dodging the bandit's wild swing with surprising agility. In a display of both strength and cunning, Theseus wrestled the club from Periphetes' grasp and, with a single powerful stroke, ended the bandit's reign of terror. Taking the club as his first trophy, Theseus continued his journey, a new weapon at his side. Next came Sinis, the pine bender, whose cruelty knew no bounds. This wicked man would force travelers to help him bend tall pine trees to the ground, then release them suddenly, catapulting his victims through the air to their deaths. When Sinis attempted this same trick on Theseus, the young prince turned the tables on his tormentor. With strength that surprised even himself, Theseus forced Sinis to experience the same fate he had inflicted on countless innocents. As the pine trees sprang back to their natural positions, the screams of the bandit echoed through the forest before fading into silence. The Crommyonian sow, a monstrous wild boar said to be the offspring of Typhon and Echidna, was Theseus's third trial. This beast had ravaged the countryside, destroying crops and devouring farmers who dared protect their lands. For days, Theseus tracked the creature through dense forests until finally cornering it in a narrow ravine. The battle was fierce and bloody, with the sow's tusks slashing dangerously close to the hero's flesh. But Theseus prevailed, driving his father's sword deep into the monster's heart, freeing the region from its reign of terror. At the cliffs of Siren, Theseus encountered perhaps the most devious of his adversaries. The bandit Siren would force travelers to wash his feet at the edge of a precipitous drop, only to kick them into the sea below, where a giant turtle awaited to devour them. When Theseus approached, he feigned compliance, kneeling before the bandit. But as Siren extended his foot, the prince seized it and with a powerful heave sent the wicked man tumbling down his own cliffs. "May the turtle find you as satisfying as you found your victim's terror," Theseus called after him, watching as Siren met the fate he had designed for others. In the plains of Eleusis, Theseus faced Crete, who challenged all passers-by to wrestling, matches that inevitably ended in death. Though smaller than his opponent, Theseus possessed technique and intelligence that outmatched brute strength. Using leverage and quick movements, he lifted the brutal wrestler high above his head and slammed him to the ground with such force that Crete never rose again. The local people, freed from the tyrant's oppression, hailed Theseus as a liberator and offered him safe passage through their lands. The final obstacle on Theseus's path was Procrustes, the stretcher, whose twisted hospitality involved forcing guests to fit an iron bed, stretching shorter visitors on a rack or amputating the limbs of taller ones. When offered this ghastly accommodation, Theseus insisted that Procrustes test his own bed first. Once the villain lay down, Theseus bound him to the frame and ensured that the punishment matched his crimes, applying Procrustes' own brutal methods against him. With each victory, Theseus's reputation grew, spreading ahead of him like a herald announcing a king's arrival. The once dangerous road became safer for ordinary travelers, who began telling tales of the young hero who had accomplished what armies could not. As Athens appeared on the horizon, its white marble buildings gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, Theseus was no longer merely the son of Aegeus seeking his father. He had become a hero in his own right, leaving behind a trail of justice where chaos had once ruled. Yet as he approached the city gates, Theseus remained unaware that within the palace walls, danger awaited in the form of the sorceress Medea. Having fled from Corinth and found refuge with King Aegeus, she had become his consort and advisor, and she had no intention of allowing an unknown son to threaten her position of influence. Already she was preparing a cup of poisoned wine to welcome the stranger, whose exploits had reached even her scheming ears. Theseus entered Athens as an unknown hero, his exploits along the coastal road having preceded him, but his true identity still concealed. The city bustled with life, merchants hawking wares in the agora, philosophers debating beneath olive trees, and citizens hurrying about their daily business. None paid particular attention to the dust-covered young man with a bronze club and a sword of unusual craftsmanship who strode purposefully toward the royal palace. His heart pounded with anticipation at the thought of finally meeting the father, who had left those tokens beneath the stone so many years ago. The palace guards, impressed by Theseus's bearing and the obvious quality of his weapons, allowed him passage to the great hall where King Aegeus held court. There, seated upon a throne of polished marble, was a man whose once powerful frame now bent slightly with age, his beard streaked with grey, his eyes carrying the weight of decades of rule. Beside him stood a woman of exotic beauty and calculating gaze, Medea of Colchis, whose reputation as a sorceress was whispered throughout Greece. Her eyes narrowed as she assessed the newcomer, sensing a threat to her carefully cultivated influence. "My king," Theseus announced, bowing with respect but not subservience. "I come from Troezen, having cleared the coastal road of the bandits who have plagued your realm for too long. I seek audience with you on a matter of great importance." Aegeus, intrigued by this bold young man's accomplishments, bid him speak. Yet before Theseus could reveal his identity, Medea leaned forward and whispered urgently in the king's ear. Her words, though inaudible to others, planted seeds of suspicion in Aegeus's mind about this stranger's true intentions. With a false smile that never reached her eyes, Medea stepped forward. "Brave traveler," she said, her voice as smooth as honey yet somehow chilling. "Such heroic deeds deserve celebration. Allow me to serve you wine with my own hands, an honor reserved for distinguished guests." She clapped, and servants appeared with a golden goblet filled with dark red wine. What none could see was the poison she had mixed into it earlier, a concoction deadly enough to kill a man before he finished his drink. As Medea extended the goblet, Theseus reached for it with his left hand, while simultaneously drawing his father's sword with his right. Rather than drinking immediately, he used the pretext of cutting meat from the feast laid before him. The distinctive hilt and blade caught Aegeus's eye, and the old king stared in shocked recognition. "That sword," he gasped, rising from his throne. "Where did you get it?" The entire court fell silent as tension filled the air like storm clouds before lightning strikes. "It was left beneath a great stone in Troezen," Theseus replied calmly, setting aside the untouched goblet, "along with these sandals upon my feet. My mother Aethra kept them until I was strong enough to claim them." He knelt before the stunned king and continued, "Father, I am Theseus, your son. Come to Athens, as you instructed so many years ago." The words hung in the air for a moment, before Aegeus, with trembling hands, reached out to touch the young man's face, searching for traces of Aethra and himself. Medea, seeing her plans crumbling before her eyes, backed away in fury and fear. The poisoned wine sat forgotten as Aegeus, now convinced by the tokens and the undeniable resemblance between them, cried out with joy and embraced his son before the entire court. My son has returned," he proclaimed, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The courtiers erupted in cheers, delighted by this unexpected reunion and the discovery of an heir to secure Athens' future. In the chaos of celebration that followed, Medea slipped away, gathering her children and what magical implements she could carry. By nightfall, her chariot, drawn by winged serpents, had vanished into the darkening sky, carrying her toward new lands where she could plot new schemes. In the palace, feasting continued late into the night as Aegeus proudly introduced Theseus to the nobles of Athens, proclaiming him the rightful prince and heir to the throne. For the first time since leaving Troezen, Theseus felt he had truly found home. Yet fate had more challenges in store for the young hero, challenges that would test not just his strength and courage, but the very essence of his humanity. On the third morning after Theseus's arrival in Athens, the city's jubilant mood shattered like pottery, dropped from the Acropolis. Black sails appeared on the horizon, ships from Crete arriving to collect Athens' most terrible tribute. As citizens gathered in the agora, their faces drawn with dread, Theseus questioned an old man standing nearby. Why does such fear grip the city at the sight of these vessels? The elder's eyes clouded with sorrow as he explained the dark bargain that had haunted Athens for 9 long years. It began with the death of King Minos' son Androgeus, the man recounted, his voice barely above a whisper. He was killed during our Panathenaic Games, some say by jealous competitors, others claim a bull sent by Poseidon gored him to death. Minos, mad with grief, declared war upon Athens. The old man's hands trembled as he continued. After years of bloodshed and a plague sent by the gods, Aegeus was forced to accept Minos' terms. Every 9 years, Athens must send 7 young men and 7 maidens to Crete as tribute. The horror of the arrangement twisted in Theseus' stomach like a knife. And what fate awaits these 14 youths, he asked, though something in his heart already knew the answer. The elder's reply came laden with dread. They are sent into the Labyrinth, a maze of endless passages designed by the inventor Daedalus. Within its depths dwells the Minotaur, half man, half bull, who feasts upon their flesh. None who enter the Labyrinth ever return. That afternoon, as lots were drawn to select the sacrificial youths, wails of despair echoed through Athens' narrow streets. Mothers clung to sons who might never return. Fathers embraced daughters with tears streaming down weathered faces. Watching this heartbreaking scene from the steps of the palace, Theseus felt something harden within his chest, a resolve crystallizing like bronze in a smith's fire. Without hesitation, he descended into the crowd and approached the Cretan emissary, a tall man whose elaborate headdress marked him as a priest of the bull god. "I volunteer," Theseus announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent agora. "I, Theseus, son of Aegeus and prince of Athens, will go to Crete in place of one selected by lot." A collective gasp rose from the gathered citizens. The Iwa Cretan emissary's eyes narrowed, recognizing an opportunity to humble Athens further by taking its newly discovered heir. With a thin smile, he nodded his acceptance of this surprising substitution. News of Theseus's decision raced through the city and reached King Aegeus within moments. The old king burst from the palace, his face contorted with anguish. "My son," he cried, gripping Theseus's shoulders with surprising strength, "I have only just found you. I cannot lose you to the Minotaur's jaws." But Theseus stood firm, explaining his plan to slay the monster and end Athens' suffering once and for all. "If I succeed," he promised his father, "I will return with white sails replacing the black ones on our ship. Watch for them as a sign of my victory." For 3 days, the city prepared the tribute ship, a sleek vessel with 30 oars and a single black sail that hung like a funeral shroud from its mast. The chosen 13 youths, along with Theseus, spent their final nights in Athens within the temple of Athena, praying for the goddess's protection. On the morning of departure, they processed to the harbor, each garlanded with flowers as if for sacrifice. The crowd that lined their path wept openly, already mourning children considered lost to the labyrinth's darkness. As Theseus boarded the ship, a sense of grim determination settled over him. He had conquered 6 monsters on his journey to Athens. Surely, the 7th would fall as well. Yet as the coastline of his homeland receded into the distance, doubt crept into his mind like sea mist. The Minotaur was no ordinary foe, but a creature born of divine punishment, housed in a maze from which no one had ever escaped. As the black-sailed ship cut through the wine-dark sea toward Crete, Theseus clutched his father's sword and silently vowed to return, not just for his own sake, but for Athens and the 13 innocent lives that now depended on him. After 3 days at sea, the island of Crete rose from the horizon like the shell of a great turtle surfacing from the depths. The tribute ship approached the harbor of Knossos, where white stone buildings with vibrant painted columns climbed the hillsides in terraced splendor. Despite its beauty, Theseus felt no wonder, only a cold determination as he gazed upon the shores of the kingdom that had brought such suffering to his people. Behind him, the 13 Athenian youths huddled together, their eyes wide with fear at the fate that awaited them. The Cretan royal guard, resplendent in bronze armor decorated with bull motifs, escorted the prisoners from the harbor through the streets of Knossos. Citizens lined the way, some jeering at the Athenian tribute, others watching in solemn silence. Theseus walked with head held high, meeting every gaze directly until they reached the sprawling palace complex, a structure so vast and intricate that it seemed a labyrinth itself, with countless courtyards, corridors, and chambers extending, in all directions beneath bright blue skies. In the central courtyard, seated upon a throne of alabaster inlaid with gold, waited King Minos, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes cold as the depths of Poseidon's realm. Beside him stood his queen Pasiphae, her face a mask that revealed nothing of the shame she carried as the Minotaur's mother. But it was the figure to the king's right that caught Theseus's attention, a young woman of extraordinary beauty, with dark hair falling in ringlets around a face that combined her father's strength with a grace entirely her own. This was Princess Ariadne, whose gaze met his with unexpected intensity. "So," King Minos's voice boomed across the courtyard, "Athens sends its prince among the tribute. Either your father values you little, young man, or this is some foolish attempt at heroism." Laughter rippled through the Cretan courtiers, but Theseus stood unflinching. "I come by my own choice," he replied clearly, "to end this tribute once and for all." His words hung in the air like a challenge, and Minos's expression darkened with anger at the Athenians' boldness. "Tomorrow," the king declared, "you and your companions shall meet the creature that dwells within the labyrinth. Tonight, you shall be our guests." As guards led the tributes to cells beneath the palace, Theseus noticed Princess Ariadne's eyes following him. Something in her gaze spoke of more than mere curiosity, perhaps compassion, perhaps something deeper. Hours later, as moonlight filtered through the narrow window of his cell, Theseus heard the soft scrape of a key in the lock. The door swung open to reveal Ariadne herself, a finger pressed to her lips in a gesture of silence. "Come quickly," she whispered. "We have little time." Ariadne led Theseus through darkened corridors to a small garden illuminated only by stars. There, sheltered by cypress trees, she turned to face him directly. "Is it true you intend to slay the Minotaur?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the night insect's song. When Theseus nodded, she continued urgently. "Then you will die, like all the others. The labyrinth cannot be navigated. It changes, shifts, confuses the mind until madness takes hold. Even if you somehow found the Minotaur, your sword would scarcely pierce its hide." "Why do you tell me this?" Theseus questioned, studying her face in the dim light. "Why would a princess of Crete help an enemy of her father?" Ariadne's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she replied, "I have watched too many innocents led to slaughter. This tribute dishonors Crete as much as it punishes Athens, and—" She hesitated before continuing more softly. "Something in you speaks of righteousness. I believe you could end this cycle of death, if only you had the means." From beneath her flowing robe, Ariadne produced 2 objects, a ball of golden thread and a sword unlike any Theseus had seen before, its bronze gleaming with an almost unearthly light. This thread was spun by Daedalus himself, she explained. Tie one end at the entrance and unwind it as you proceed. It will guide you back when the deed is done. She placed the weapon in his hands, adding, "And this sword was blessed by Hephaestus. It can pierce any hide, even that of a creature born from divine punishment." Their fingers touched as Theseus accepted these gifts, and in that moment something passed between them, a connection that transcended the enmity between their kingdoms. "If I succeed," Theseus promised, his voice low and earnest, "I will take you from this place. You will not share in your father's punishment." Ariadne's eyes widened at this pledge, hope and fear mingling in her expression. "Return to your cell now," she instructed, "before the guards discover your absence. Tomorrow, when you enter the labyrinth, remember my gifts and remember your promise." As dawn broke over Knossos, drums began to beat a solemn rhythm. The time had come for the tributes to face their fate. Guards assembled the 14 Athenians in the courtyard, where King Minos and his court awaited. At the far end, a massive bronze door stood open, revealing the entrance to the labyrinth, a dark mouth leading into the earth, from which emanated a smell of damp stone and something else, something feral and ancient. As Theseus approached this threshold between light and darkness, he felt Ariadne's gaze upon him. With the thread secretly tied to his waist and her sword concealed beneath his tunic, he stepped forward to meet his destiny, and perhaps change the fates of 2 kingdoms forever. The bronze doors clanged shut behind Theseus and the 13 Athenian youths, sealing them within the labyrinth's suffocating darkness. For several heartbeats, no one moved or spoke. The absolute blackness and the knowledge of what hunted them paralyzed even the bravest among them. Then Theseus's voice cut through the gloom, steady and reassuring. "Stay close. I have a way to navigate this maze and a weapon to face the beast. We will survive this, all of us." As their eyes adjusted to the dimness, faint shafts of light from hidden air vents became visible, revealing stone walls that glistened with moisture. Theseus tied one end of Ariadne's golden thread to an iron ring near the entrance and instructed the others to hold hands in a chain. "No matter what happens," he commanded, "do not break this line." With the thread in one hand and Ariadne's sword ready in the other, he led them deeper into the labyrinth's coiling passages. The maze defied all logic. Corridors ended abruptly or circled back upon themselves. Staircases descended into water-filled chambers or ascended to paths that seemed to hang in mid-air. Occasionally, they stumbled upon grim reminders of previous tributes, scraps of cloth, a sandal, bones picked clean. With each such discovery, the Athenians' fear threatened to overwhelm them, but Theseus's unwavering confidence kept panic at bay. All the while, he carefully unspooled the golden thread, their lifeline in this disorienting underworld. Hours passed as they ventured deeper. The air grew heavier, carrying a stench that made their eyes water. The unmistakable odor of rotting flesh mixed with the musky scent of bull. Then came a sound that froze their blood, a low, rumbling bellow that reverberated through the stone passages. It was not the cry of any natural animal, but something that existed between worlds, part divine rage, part mortal suffering. The Minotaur was aware of their presence. "Hide here," Theseus whispered, guiding the group into a recessed alcove. "I will face the creature alone. If I do not return by the time you count 300 heartbeats, follow the thread back to the entrance." The youths protested, unwilling to abandon him, but Theseus was resolute. "Athens needs you alive more than it needs a dead hero," he insisted, pressing the thread into the hands of a girl named Periboea, who had shown particular courage throughout their journey. With Ariadne's sword drawn, Theseus moved forward alone, his footsteps deliberately heavy to draw the creature away from his companions. The passages widened into a vast chamber, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadows. At its center stood an altar, stained dark with old blood, surrounded by piles of human remains, a monument to 9 years of sacrifice. And there, moving into a shaft of light, was the Minotaur. The creature was more terrible than any tale had described, taller than 2 men with powerful limbs ending in clawed hands that could rip a warrior apart. Its bull's head featured horns, as long as spears, and its eyes, disturbingly human, gleamed with a tortured intelligence. This was no mindless beast, but a being cursed with awareness of its own monstrosity, driven mad by confinement and forced to feed on human flesh to survive. For a moment, Theseus felt an unexpected flash of pity. That moment of hesitation nearly cost him his life. The Minotaur charged with shocking speed, horns lowered to impale the intruder. Theseus dove sideways, rolling across the chamber floor. As the beast crashed into the wall where he had stood, stone cracked under the impact, and before the creature could recover, Theseus slashed at its flank with Ariadne's sword. The blade cut true, drawing a roar of pain and rage that shook dust from the ceiling. What followed was a deadly dance through the chamber, Theseus using his agility against the Minotaur's overwhelming strength. Each time the hero evaded a charge, he struck back, opening wounds that would have felled any mortal bull. Yet the Minotaur fought on, driven by a fury that transcended physical pain. Blood, both human and bovine, slickened the floor, making each movement treacherous. Twice Theseus slipped and nearly met his end beneath trampling hooves or goring horns. The battle seemed to last both moments and eternity. Exhaustion tugged at Theseus's limbs, while the Minotaur's movements grew increasingly frenzied as loss took its toll. In a desperate gambit, Theseus backed against the sacrificial altar, appearing to stumble. The Minotaur, sensing victory, lowered its head for a final, devastating charge. At the last possible instant, Theseus leaped onto the altar and then vaulted over the creature's massive shoulders, driving Ariadne's sword downward with all his remaining strength. The blade plunged between the Minotaur's shoulder blades, piercing its heart. A sound unlike any Theseus had ever heard, part bellow, part human cry, echoed through the labyrinth as the creature crashed to the ground. Its massive body shuddered once, twice, and then lay still. Theseus stood over his fallen foe, breathing heavily, covered in blood, both his and the beast's. In death, the Minotaur's face seemed almost peaceful, freed at last from its tortured existence. After retrieving Ariadne's sword, Theseus returned to the alcove where he had left his companions. They embraced him with tears of relief and wonder, scarcely believing he had accomplished what no one had before. Together, they followed the golden thread back through the maze, its path now illuminated by a growing sense of hope. When they finally reached the bronze doors, they pounded upon them with collective strength, announcing to all of Crete that the impossible had happened. The tributes of Athens had survived the labyrinth, and the Minotaur was no more. The bronze doors of the labyrinth remained sealed despite their pounding, the Cretan guards perhaps disbelieving that anyone could have survived, much less triumphed over the Minotaur. As precious minutes slipped away, panic threatened to overtake the exhausted Athenians, until Theseus discovered a smaller side passage, likely used by those who fed the beast. This narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through, eventually led them to an opening near the palace stables, where they emerged under the cover of night. "We must reach the harbor before dawn," Theseus whispered, gathering the group in the shadow of a cypress grove. "Our ship still waits, and with the confusion our escape will cause, we may slip away before Minos can organize a pursuit." Yet even as he spoke, Theseus's eyes searched the palace gardens for any sign of Ariadne. He had made her a promise, and, despite the urgency of their situation, he would not leave her to face her father's wrath when the Minotaur's death was discovered. As if summoned by his thoughts, a cloaked figure hurried toward them through the moonlit gardens. Ariadne's face, when she pulled back her hood, was flushed with excitement and fear. "The palace is in chaos," she reported breathlessly. A servant discovered blood seeping beneath the labyrinth doors and raised the alarm. "My father has ordered. The doors opened at dawn. He believes it is your blood, not the Minotaur's, that stains the floor." "You've done more than enough," Theseus told her, taking her hands in his. "But now you must decide. Return to your chambers and you might escape your father's suspicion. Come with us, and you can never return to Crete." Ariadne's answer came without hesitation. "I made my choice when I gave you the thread and sword. There is nothing for me here but shame and secrets." The tenderness in her eyes as she gazed at Theseus spoke of feelings that had blossomed in the face of death's shadow. The group moved stealthily through Knossos, using pathways Ariadne knew from childhood explorations. Twice they froze as Pallas. Guards passed nearby, but the gods seemed to favor their escape, shrouding them in convenient shadows or distracting potential witnesses. When they finally reached the harbor, they found their ship still moored where they had left it, its Cretan guards drowsy and unprepared for 14 desperate escapees and a Cretan princess. The attack was swift and silent. Theseus and the stronger, Athenian youths overpowered the guards without raising an alarm, binding and gagging them rather than spilling more blood on this night of already historic deeds. Meanwhile, Ariadne guided the others in preparing the ship for immediate departure. Oars were positioned, ropes untied, and water skins filled from a nearby fountain. As the first hints of dawn colored the eastern sky, the black-sailed vessel slipped from Knossos harbor, its passengers rowing with strength born of desperate freedom. By mid-morning, Crete had become a dark smudge on the horizon. But Theseus knew they were not yet safe. King Minos commanded a powerful navy that could overtake their smaller craft if their escape was discovered in time. We must not sail directly for Athens, he decided, consulting with the ship's captain. We'll make for Naxos first. It's the largest of the Cyclades and will give us a chance to rest and reprovision before the final journey home. The voyage to Naxos took a full day and night, during which Theseus and Ariadne grew ever closer. Under starry skies, they shared stories of their childhoods, he of his years in Troezen, not knowing his true heritage, she of growing up in the shadow of her half-brother's monstrous existence. I never saw him, Ariadne confessed quietly, but I heard his cries at night. Sometimes they sounded almost human. Theseus held her as she wept for all the tragedy her family had endured because of pride and divine punishment. When Naxos appeared, before them, its harbors and beaches seemed to promise safety. The island was sacred to Dionysus, god of wine and revelry, and as they made landfall, they discovered a festival in his honor was underway. Exhausted from their ordeal and subsequent flight, the Athenians were welcomed by the islanders, who saw their arrival as a sign of divine favor. That night a feast was held on the beach, with wine flowing freely and music playing until the stars wheeled overhead. In the midst of celebration, Theseus found himself drawn away from the festivities by a troubling dream. Athena appeared to him, her grey eyes stern with warning. You carry what is not yours, the goddess seemed to say, though whether she meant Ariadne or something else remained unclear when Theseus awoke with a start. Beside him, Ariadne slept peacefully, her face finally relaxed after days of tension. Looking at her, Theseus felt both tenderness and a strange, growing unease. That same night, the god Dionysus himself, drawn by the celebrations or perhaps by destiny, walked the shores of his sacred island. Seeing Ariadne asleep on the beach, the god was instantly captivated by her beauty and the noble spirit that radiated from her even in sleep. A divine jealousy took hold of him, along with a conviction that this mortal woman was meant for a greater fate than to be one prince's prize from a successful quest. As dawn approached, Theseus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Whether influenced by Athena's warning, fear of Minos's pursuit, concern for his Athenian charges, or some darker whisper of fate, he ordered the ship prepared for departure, while Ariadne still slept. We sail for Athens immediately, he commanded, his voice flat and his eyes avoiding the still form of the princess on the shore. The Athenians, though confused by this sudden betrayal, dared not question their prince after all they had survived. Together. And so, as the first light of morning touched the eastern horizon, the black-sailed ship departed Naxos with 14 Athenians aboard, leaving behind the Cretan princess who had sacrificed everything to save them. Whether Theseus looked back as the island receded is not recorded in any telling of the tale, but it is said that when Ariadne awoke to find herself abandoned, her cries of grief were so moving that Dionysus himself appeared to comfort her, offering divine love in place of mortal betrayal. The winds favored the Athenian ship as it cut through the Aegean toward home, almost as if the gods themselves were eager to see the conclusion of Theseus's remarkable journey. The mood aboard, however, was far from triumphant. Though they had escaped the Labyrinth and fled Crete successfully, The abandonment of Ariadne cast a shadow over their victory. The younger Athenians whispered among themselves, wondering what had possessed their prince to leave behind the woman who had saved them all. Theseus himself stood at the prow for hours, silent and brooding, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if seeking answers in the meeting of sea and sky. When questioned about his decision, he offered only cryptic references to divine guidance and the complications that bringing a Cretan princess to Athens might create. Yet in the depths of night, when he thought himself unobserved, one of the youths glimpsed him casting a small golden object into the waves, the remnant of Ariadne's thread, the last physical connection to the woman he had promised to protect. As the familiar coastline of Attica appeared on the third day of their voyage, home excitement began to overpower the lingering discomfort. The tributes who had departed as sacrificial victims were returning as living testaments to Theseus's heroism. Families who had grieved them as already dead would soon embrace them once more. Even Theseus's mood lightened as he thought of his father's joy upon seeing him alive and victorious. In the rush of anticipation, however, a critical detail slipped from his mind, one that would transform triumph into tragedy. Before their departure from Athens, Theseus had promised King Aegeus a signal of his success. If he survived the Labyrinth and slew the Minotaur, he would replace the ship's black sails with white ones for the return journey. This simple change would allow the old king to know his son's fate while the vessel was still far from shore, sparing him hours of agonizing uncertainty. But the tumultuous events in Crete and Naxos had pushed this promise from Theseus's thoughts, and the ship continued to approach Athens under the same dark canvas that had carried them to what should have been their doom. High atop the Acropolis, King Aegeus had maintained his vigil since the day the tribute ship departed. Each morning he climbed the sacred hill to scan the horizon, searching for any sign of the returning vessel. On this day, as the sun reached its zenith, his aging eyes finally spotted a sail in the distance. His heart leapt with desperate hope, only to plummet as the ship drew closer, and the black sail became unmistakable. In that moment, all the king's hopes for his son and heir, the child he had only just discovered after so many years, crumbled into dust. Overcome with grief and convinced that Theseus lay dead in the Minotaur's lair, Aegeus could not bear the thought of living in a world without his newly found son. In a final act of despair, the elderly king stepped to the cliff's edge. Guards noticed too late what their ruler intended. Before anyone could intervene, Aegeus cast himself from the Acropolis's height into the churning sea below. The waters that would later bear his name, the Aegean, received the king's broken body as his final sacrifice to a son he believed lost forever. Meanwhile, as the ship entered the harbor of Piraeus, Theseus stood tall at the prow, eagerly scanning the welcoming crowd for his father's familiar figure. Instead, he was met by palace officials wearing expressions of profound sorrow. When told of Aegeus's fate and the forgotten promise that had led to it, Theseus fell to his knees upon the deck, a cry of anguish tearing from his throat that silenced the cheering crowds. In a single moment of forgetfulness, he had lost not only the woman who had saved him, but also the father he had journeyed so far to find. The ship's arrival, which should have been Athens's greatest celebration, instead became a scene of confused emotions, joy at the return of the youth's thought, lost forever, mixed with genuine grief for their beloved king. Theseus was helped ashore, his face ashen with shock and remorse. As he walked through the city toward the palace that was now his by right of succession, citizens fell silent in his wake, uncertain whether to celebrate the hero or mourn alongside the son. That night, as Theseus sat alone in the throne room that should have witnessed his triumphant reunion with his father, the full weight of his actions pressed upon him like a physical burden. In the span of a few days, he had abandoned the woman who loved him on a foreign shore and caused the death of his father through careless neglect of a simple promise. Victory over the Minotaur, impressive as it was, seemed hollow against these personal failures. Yet even in this darkest moment, the responsibilities of kingship could not be ignored. Athens needed leadership, perhaps now more than ever, and Theseus was the only one who could provide it. As dawn broke on his first day as king, he emerged from his father's, now his, chambers, with a new resolve hardened in the crucible of grief. He would honor Aegeus not through continued mourning, but by becoming the ruler Athens deserved, one who would transform the city as thoroughly as his journey had transformed him. A somber coronation followed King Aegeus's funeral rites, with Theseus accepting the crown of Athens with a humility born of recent lessons. "I come to this throne through paths of both glory and shame," he told the assembled nobles and citizens. "Let it be known that I recognize both. The strength that helped me slay the Minotaur will now be devoted to serving Athens, and the wisdom I lacked will be my most earnest pursuit as your king." With these words, Theseus began a reign that would eventually be remembered as Athens's golden age, though he himself would never forget the painful price of the crown he wore. Years passed, and under Theseus's rule, Athens flourished as never before. The young king who had entered the city bearing both victory and tragedy proved himself a visionary leader whose ambitions extended far beyond the palace walls. Perhaps his greatest achievement came early in his reign, the Synoikismos, or unification of Attica. Where once scattered villages and towns had existed in isolation, Theseus created a single political entity with Athens at its heart. "Let all citizens of Attica be Athenians," he proclaimed, "equal in rights and responsibilities, diverse in talents but united in purpose." This revolutionary concept transformed the region's governance. Theseus established a central council where representatives from all districts could voice their concerns, disbanded the separate ruling councils of smaller settlements, and created a common judicial system. Yet most remarkably, he willingly surrendered some of his own absolute power, declaring that he would serve as military leader and guardian of the laws, while allowing the people greater say in their governance. These reforms laid the foundation for what would eventually evolve into Athenian democracy, earning Theseus a place in history as not just a monster slayer, but a political innovator. Religious life in Athens also flourished under his patronage. Theseus established new festivals honoring the gods who had aided his quest, particularly Athena, whose wisdom he increasingly sought, and Poseidon, whom many still believed to be his divine father. The Panathenaic Games were expanded, and he instituted the Synoikia festival to commemorate the unification of Attica. These celebrations brought not only religious devotion but economic prosperity as visitors flocked to Athens from across the Greek world. Yet for all his public accomplishments, Theseus's personal life remained marked by the shadows of his past. Though he eventually married, first an Amazon warrior queen named Hippolyta, and later Phaedra, ironically the younger sister of Ariadne, true happiness seemed to elude him. Dreams of Naxos and its abandoned princess reportedly haunted his sleep, while the memory of his father's death tempered his moments of triumph with bittersweet reflection. Perhaps it was these personal tragedies that gave him uncommon empathy for the suffering of others and drove his desire to create a more just society. The king's adventurous spirit never fully subsided with age. Many tales tell of his continued exploits, helping Heracles in his labors, joining the legendary Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece, and even descending to the underworld with his friend Pirithous in a foolhardy attempt to abduct Persephone as a bride. This last adventure nearly proved fatal. While Heracles eventually rescued Theseus, Pirithous remained trapped forever in the chair of forgetfulness, a warning about the consequences of hubris that even heroes must heed. In his later years, political fortunes shifted. A faction of Athenians, perhaps tired of reform or jealous of his enduring popularity, rose against him during an absence from the city. Upon returning to find himself unwelcome in the very city he had transformed, Theseus accepted exile with the same dignity he had shown in accepting kingship decades earlier. "Athens is greater than any one man," he reportedly told his supporters who urged him to fight. "What we have built together will outlast us all." The aging hero sought refuge on the island of Skyros, where King Lycomedes welcomed him, or so it seemed. Whether through fear of harboring such a famous exile or simple treachery, Lycomedes led Theseus to a cliff overlooking the sea, ostensibly to show him his lands, and there pushed him to his death. The man who had survived the labyrinth, defeated countless foes, and transformed Athens into a nascent power, met his end through simple betrayal, falling into the same sea that had claimed his father years before. For centuries afterward, Theseus's final resting place remained unknown until the Athenian general Cimon, following an oracle's guidance, discovered what were believed to be the hero's remains on Skyros. These were returned to Athens with great ceremony in the 5th century BCE and interred in a sanctuary that became known as the Theseum. This act symbolized the enduring power of Theseus's legacy. Even centuries after his death, Athenians still claimed him as the embodiment of their city's values and aspirations. Beyond Athens, Theseus's influence spread through art, literature, and collective memory. Pottery painters depicted his adventures on countless vessels. Tragic playwrights explored the complexities of his relationships with Ariadne, Phaedra, and his son Hippolytus. Philosophers referenced his political innovations when discussing ideal governance. The Labyrinth and the Minotaur became powerful metaphors that resonate even today, representing the conquering of fear, the triumph of civilization over savagery, and the power of human ingenuity against seemingly impossible odds. In modern times, Theseus's legend continues to captivate our imagination. His story has been retold in novels, films, video games, and artworks, each adaptation finding new relevance in his complex character, the hero capable of great courage but also tragic mistakes, the reformer who changed his society while struggling with personal demons. Archaeological discoveries in Crete, particularly the sprawling palace complex at Knossos, with its intricate layout, have prompted scholars to reconsider the historical basis for the labyrinth myth, suggesting that ancient stories often contain kernels of truth wrapped in layers of symbolism. Perhaps most enduringly, philosophers still debate the paradox that bears his name, the ship of Theseus. If, over time, every plank and rope of Theseus's ship were replaced as they wore out, would it remain fundamentally the same vessel? This question about identity and continuity through change resonates beyond academic circles, inviting us all to consider what makes us who we are, despite life's constant transformations. As our tale comes to an end, we might reflect on why Theseus endures in our collective consciousness when so many ancient heroes have faded. Perhaps it is because his story speaks to the full spectrum of human experience: triumph and failure, courage and negligence, political vision alongside personal blindness. In Theseus, we see not just an idealized hero, but a mirror of our own. Complex humanity, capable of slaying monsters one moment and creating tragedy the next, yet always striving to build something greater than ourselves. And so, dear listeners, as the stars continue their eternal dance across the night sky, remember the tale of Theseus, not just as a hero who conquered a labyrinth, but as a man who navigated the even more complex maze of human existence, leaving behind both warning and inspiration for all who would follow in his footsteps. Sleep well, and may Morpheus bring you dreams of ancient heroes and the timeless truths their stories still reveal.